Welcome, friends, to another seminar with Bracha Lichtenberg Ettinger, who is coming at us from Jerusalem, where she is currently based. This is the study groups in Psychoanalysis and Politics. This is our second seminar with Bracha. We're very honored that all of you have been able to join us. I'd like to begin by reading a biography of Dr. Bracha Lichtenberg Ettinger. She is an eminent artist painter and an influential artist-theorist, philosopher, supervising psychoanalyst, and clinical psychologist, member of NLS, WAP, and TAICP, whose pioneering work has emerged during the 1990s and caused major transformations in the fields of contemporary European painting, as well as in philosophy, psychoanalysis, critical studies, art theory, art history, film and literary studies, and feminism. Based in Tel Aviv, her art, both abstract and symbolic, is a research of depth and color as light and of archival traces of trauma, which engage with historical and personal memory in relation to women in war, oblivion, trauma, and witnessing. Ettinger, expert of the late Lacanian period and a translator of Lacan to Hebrew, is professor of psychoanalysis and art at the European Graduate School and distinguished professor of philosophy at GCAS College. She is one of the leading theorists in the realm of contemporary French philosophy, feminism, and psychoanalysis. Her matrixial theory offers a metaphysical paradigm for rethinking subjectivity, trans-subjectivity, the maternal, and the feminine. Her artworks, mainly paintings, drawings, artist notebooks, and video, have been presented at exhibitions worldwide at major museums of contemporary art, and they have been the subject of several monographs. Her most recent shows include solo shows at the Silesian Museum in Katowice, in Castillo de Riviola, and an upcoming solo show at Castillo, Turin, called Psychic Wounds in the Warehouse, as well as in Dallas and at the Istanbul Biennale. And she has an upcoming solo show at Richard Saltoun Gallery in London. Amongst her own publications, we have And My Heart, Wound Space, which was published on the occasion of the 14th Istanbul Biennale in 2015, The Matrixial Border Space, and Matrixial Subjectivity, Aesthetics, Ethics, selected essays which cover 25 years in 2 volumes and that are edited by Griselda Polak. I would like to add 2 additional biographical notes, which might give a certain perspective on Bracha Ettinger's research on trauma and women in war. Bracha led the biggest rescue, evacuation, and saving operation in the history of the Middle East, saving the drowning young men of the Eilat shipwreck when she was only 19 years old. She was wounded during this operation, and she suffered from shell shock following it. Only 50 years later, most recently, this event was released from secrecy, and she was given the highest Air Force medal for her heroism. Ettinger is a supporter of Palestinian rights, and she is an activist member in Physicians for Human Rights Israel. With that said, please welcome Bracha Ettinger.
Okay, thank you very much. It is really wonderful to be with you again. I will remind a little what we were talking last time, and we are going more profoundly. My aim is really to facilitate the reading of the very late Lacan. This is one of the purposes of this presentation for me. And the other is to be acquainted with my own concept, the matrixial border space, the matrixial border time, the processes that I call border linking, border spaces, and in general, metamorphosis. And it is always difficult for me because I feel I have to start from the start, but I also feel that I have to start from the now. Both the now and the then are very calling me. last time I talked a little on the problematics of psychoanalysis, which when we have to rethink the feminine, we have to, it is not only the feminine that we are dealing with, and not even only the Oedipal or the anti-Oedipal, because the full structure of narcissism is engaged. The idea of what is subject is engaged, and even, and more for our time in a sense, is it enough to deal with terms, if we are Lacanian, of the symbolic, the imaginary, and the real? And I realized little by little that the field I'm talking about, which have to do with resonance, with the way we are trans-connecting to one another emotionally, unconsciously, and more also in terms of technology and the digital, necessitate another dimension still, which I called finally, I came to call little by little the subreal, subreality, which is different from the real on all its definitions. The early Lacan definition and the late Lacan definition are still not accounting for what I'm calling subreality, which is the field of this trans-connectivity, transjective connectivity, which is not intersubjective. I said that in terms of what does it mean to rethink the feminine, we have the habit by now to think the feminine in terms of the forced sexuation positioning in the late Lacan, in the 20th seminar. But I would claim, and I have claimed, that this is still the feminine through the angle of the phallus. And if I want to talk about another feminine, it would be from that angle that I will also look at masculinity, femininity, and so on. And it's not about gender. And the field of the matrixial, in fact, is beyond not the phallic in Lacan, but the four positions of sexuation. One of the most difficult notions to deal with is when we get into the question of what is death drive, following Freud and Lacan, and finally also what is life drive. Life drive, we talked last time, is based finally on the model of the unicells and the amoeba, and with Lacan it is the lamella. And the problem with this kind of life drive is that it has never attended the human. It has never been humanized. This is the life drive of the DNA. This is what for Lacan is that bits of life which from generation to generation escapes and moves and continue, but it has nothing to do with our experience as living being, coming into life and then addressing death. As a result of the way that Freud conceptualized both the life drive and the death drive, and with life drive also think about libido, and with libido also think about the object and then the objet, little a, the trouble is that the only horizon we are facing at the limits, at the edges of our unconscious are the limits of death. And when Lacan takes in the seminar on ethics, a take on Antigone, it is about, and concept of aesthetics and ethics addresses the human being facing the certain knowledge of its own death. With the matrixial, I take one more supplementary edge zone, which is that not birth, not the fact that from birth we are starting to rethink, to think backward subjectivity, but pregnancy and birthing, the mother birthing is a part of this trans-subjective connectivity we can contact, we can come to contact, and we have to realize when we are pulling the strings in that sense, in that field of transconnectivity, in that subreal field, and how certain mechanisms are not enough when we enter in our relation with the other, in the transferential relation when we enter into communication. So we're going to talk again, but from a different point of view, on the question of the gaze and the screen. I'm going to propose a certain perspective, which is also practical. And for that, I'm thanking Jamison, who is present here and asked me if I could talk also a bit about the practicality. How do we employ the matrixial feminine in our work, which is very important. And I see here also Eli Raglan, who is an old friend from Paris years ago, and I didn't even understand what is the other. She took the patience to explain to me. Eli translated to English L'étourdi, and I translated it to Hebrew in parallel. And these are the big, good days in Paris. So perhaps I want to, there is one more thing that I wanted to talk about, which is the concept that recently comes in feminism. And this is the concept of sympoiesis. I don't know if some of you heard about it, but I will not put here all my criticism of sympoiesis, but I will present what I have presented many years ago as copoiesis. Sim and co is the same word, and therefore I would like to draw your attention that with sympoiesis, it is possible to think about transconnectivity to just anything and everything. With copoiesis, there is also the emotional and affective investment. And therefore, sympoiesis can go without us. Copoiesis needs the human being as at least one pole of connectivity. Another major thing that to realize is that even in seminar 20 with Jacques Lacan, he takes he insists on the fact that when we talk about the feminine, he says, and don't talk to me about the maternal. Like mother is another thing. Now, this kind of split is not possible in any matrixial thinking. What is the meaning of don't talk to me about the maternal? Not in the sense that I need to be a mother in order to understand the feminine, not at all. But we have all been born, and therefore we have all been transconnected with another female human psyche, which have become our mother, and which is in that non-conscious field, our archaic mother, M/big other, the first archaic other. And therefore, when Lacan says that, even in the very late readings, it means that it favorizes that split that, according to Lacan and Freud himself, must take place through the Oedipal mechanisms. That there must be this split from the maternal, the mother, and the female and the woman. Each of those must be lovely, in a good way, put in their position. And with the matrix, I say that's not at all possible. And the foreclosure of the feminine is not possible. And that is our work. And it will take years, and it will take 1 more 1,000 years maybe, but we are in it now. One of the papers I wrote, few papers I wrote, analyzing both the poetry and the psychoanalysis or therapy of Sylvia Platt, as she's talking about it in her own diaries, and also what I see in the poetry. And this is a fantastic material because she wrote on her therapy from her point of view, and we can read it and realize what was the process and how it led to certain splits that finally were not repairable. And this made me think of certain aspects of the feminine matrixial in terms of the Demeter-Persephone. Demeter-Persephone even complex, because each one of us human beings have first to separate from the maternal, from the archaic maternal. But what are the terms to articulate this separation? This is separating in jointness, joining while separating, taking it from this pregnancy position and then moving like that, so that the total split described by Kat or by other kind of mechanism doesn't work. So what is this Demeter and Persephone? What is this kind of love that drives the mother to look for the daughter when the daughter disappears? In thinking the feminine in terms of Demeter and Persephone complex, I was bringing to the fore what I call the shocks of maternality. The mother as subject, because transconnectivity with the other works not with the other as object, but with the other as subject or trans-subjective to myself. So errors of border linking must be taken into account. Entangled psychic areas of the psyche, trans-connected kernels of subjectivity, inform the individual subject throughout life, starting from the most archaic phase in a psychic dimension shared with a female body and maternal figure, maternal or pre-maternal figure. Women suffered and still suffer from interpretations concerning penis lack and penis envy and the foreclosure of the maternal and the archaic motherhood in the process of subjectivization in our culture and in psychoanalysis. Access offered for meaning by the Oedipus as myth, as well as the anti-Oedipus fragmentation, are insufficient for giving meaning to the woman to woman, and later on, even more generally, same sex, and then other sex difference, and for the difference of male and female from the mother, because the daughter also have to differentiate herself from the mother, of course. We have to ask what kind of human subject and society was shaped in view of the lack of womb, not as an organ, but in terms of lack of a whole symbolic universe of meaning and value stemming from the matrixial sphere, where the containing of and approximating to the other occurs on a subsubjective and pre-subjective level. And the passages from non-life to life, and sometimes from non-life to death, as well as birth and birthing, enters the unconscious in the feminine, through the feminine, by the feminine. The expense of the psychic foreclosure of the mother that I discussed in another paper in the terms of Yocasta, the complex of Yocasta, and the psychic matricide offered by the cultural symbolization in our society, and the subjectivation processes affect a matrixial thanatos and turns against the self. What I'm saying here, that the foreclosure of the feminine maternal and archaic maternality takes certain possibilities and turn them against ourselves. turns them also against just anything that we associated, that human being associated with the archaic maternal, and polluting all of that, the earth, the air, the water, anything that have been associated was foreclosed and left outside under all kind of political imaginations that makes us afraid to touch this terrain, but we have to. So I'm also dealing, and here I'm talking also to Duan that I see here. So there is another kind of love which is neither narcissistic nor anaclitic, like for Freud and later on for Lacan, is born in the archaic transconnectedness with the M/other, with the mother. The primary infant compassion is infused with the maternal matrixial eros of border linking. The human subject is born already enveloped through certain possibilities of resonance with the maternal psyche, fantasy, and of course, trauma. When Freud remarks that we also failed to discover why separation should be such a painful thing, he says that in Inhibition, Symptoms, and Anxiety, he is surely aware of the profoundness of some lacuna in his own theory. This lacuna is related to the archaic maternality and to the pre-birth, and it is connected with the riddle of love and the pain of its loss. Not the pain of the loss of the object, but the pain of the disentanglement of love itself. I refer here to mourning and melancholia. When the entangled areal of the psyche that infuse the entangled kernels of partial subjects in border linking are taken into account as weaving, a sphere of encounter eventing that informs each individual subject, compassion and respect to the subject maternal object will accompany any empathy towards the subject itself. Now here I'm almost practical. I'm practically saying that there are some notions of empathy which are empathy without compassion. The meaning of that is that they are empathy to the patient without compassion to those objects that the patient bring into the scenario. And therefore, an empathy without compassion to those we are talking about in the therapy, like the mother, the father, the sibling, the environment, anything, is an empty empathy. And it produces split. So it doesn't mean that the patient cannot complain and shout and be unhappy and hate. That's not the question. The question is, are we infantilizing ourselves in the process so that we are unable to hold in ourselves, in compassion, just anything and everything that arises? And do we produce splitting in the process of therapy? Now we need notions in order to stop ourselves, a mirror to show when we are doing that. And so there is a few concepts that I want to suggest, which are practical enough to help us to realize that. Bringing the maternal matrixial subjectivity into account is comprehending the structure of the subject, whether male or female, that's not the point, means thinking of differentiation and differentiation with a T and with a C by way of non-splitting. So in the Demeter-Persephone complex, it is becoming a woman when she is becoming a woman when she recognizes her own mother pain and joy and respects the whole web that is forming the unconscious sharing itself, from which we come. It is not like we are subject and now we have to communicate with another subject. The transsubjectivity is much earlier. And in the structuring of ourselves as separate, this is where we have to realize what are the leftover of the process. So this respect is a subjectivizing, liberating force, also a force of resistance. So it is bordering on a love to the other, which is of a primary kind, neither reactive nor reparatory, a love connected to the matrixial eros of border linking itself. If we think of it that way, even when we arrive at the Oedipus complex, it is already informed by the impossibility to not share. When the analyst uses the subject, the subject's objects, the subject's mother, the patient's parent, as a ready-made monster, the ready-made mother monster, ready-made father monster, as an automatic cause or explanation for any human suffering or a toxic substance, which is very popular in recent 20 years, bestowing, I'm talking about the analyst when the analyst is bringing that. And the examples I found in literature, in descriptions of Winnicott himself, of Christopher Bolas, of Eigen, where the patient talks whatever, and the analyst says, like Bolas is saying, when you were a baby, your mother was sadistically and pervertly doing this or that. Your father was a psychopath and so on. So it is the analyst who is the toxic subject in the structure. I wrote about it in terms of Laios, that Laios wants to kill the baby first. And we have to think about Laios in terms of Laios, not from the point of view of Oedipus, who looks what about the father, but in terms of what is it, this sacrificial tendency in the parental, which can hold the analyst's position itself. So the anger towards the mother or the father that results during a session or after it might not be ancient at all. It might be caused now in the session itself. We don't have enough time to get into how Freud is doing it with Dora, but you can read the paper, or how Winnicott is doing it with his own patient, when the patient suffers and shouts and hates her mother, and Winnicott says, I hate your mother. Well, this is the point where she becomes psychotic and then hysterical, and then he has to hospitalize her, etc. So, and I took the examples of Winnicott treating Sarah, and the other, but I want to move a little more. And how can we see what we are doing as analysts and what is the practical meaning of the matrixial in the therapy? There are 3 non-pathological zones that I call the zones of shock of maternality. They have their joy and trauma and fantasy and corresponding anxieties and arousals which can be handled in the therapy or in analysis with care and respect. The pre-maternity and pregnancy, and this includes miscarriages, abortions, processes of adoption, barrenness, worries concerning fertility, infertility, childlessness, and variations of pregnancy. Here, the male figure might suffer from those shocks of maternality just as well as a subject. It's not female necessarily. But pregnancy itself and birthing is female. But through that experiencing of the female, it is the structure of subjectivity that I'm trying to affect. It's not about woman. It's about what is it to be a subject? What is it to be a human being? So we were connected, our birth is connected with the other birthing us. And birth with birthing are to be thought together in order to understand what is the transjectivity and transsubjectivity that we are all, we all have the capacity to become aware of. And then there might be traumatic and phantasmatic losses and separations during motherhood and fatherhood, from birthing and until old age. This is one of the things that when we take as analysts the position, the phantasmatic, the imaginary, and the symbolic position of a father or a mother, we can remind ourselves that we are not replacing them by way of splitting. We are joining them. We are beside them. We are nourished by whatever it is that allows us to be loved by the patient. So we are not to reject those who carry that love, but find our way next to them. Now, what are another thing which I would like to emphasize is that when Freud realizes that certain fantasies return and repeat with almost every patient, he gives them the status of primary fantasies. This status of primal fantasy help us, the analyst, to realize that perhaps reality was a bit different and that we have to get acquainted with the possibility to differentiate between trauma and fantasy. So when there was a rape of a daughter, we have to know that there was a trauma. But the fantasies that the father desires me are very important. They are primordial. They are life-giving. Only the father will not actualize it, and it will not become sexual desire and enactment. But so we are in different zones between fantasy and trauma, and it's our task to know the difference and bring it into account. But all those that were finally elected by Freud and got the title of primal fantasies are in the service of the male subjectivity and paternal position. So anything that could have been also primordial and primal, because it repeats itself endlessly in all analysts and is related to the maternal, was not declared, was not recognized as also primary. And therefore we are always looking for a cause. If you're unhappy, it's your mother, or we are looking for a cause where we already have about 100 years of habit not to look for a cause when we realize that the primary fantasy is on the scene. We also realize how important is the primal fantasy. The traumatic moment is that when the adult plays on the primal fantasy and become a persecutor or take advantage of it, then there is a trauma. Because what we need is those space to remain free and phantasmatic. The patient of Winnicott needs to continue to hate her mother, then love her mother, then whatever. She needs that field of, when Winnicott says, yes, I hate your mother, she is a monster, that's finished. She cannot anymore play with those so important fantasies. And it becomes rigid, and it becomes split, and it becomes good and bad. And when we are contributing to splitting mechanism instead of understanding the deep shareability, this is the road to psychotization. Because we are using basic archaic paranoid mechanism of splitting. Splitting is not so advisable. Now, what are the mother fantasies? These are the primary mother fantasies that we can discuss. Fantasy of devouring, abandonment, and not enoughness. I don't mean good, not good enough, but not enoughness in general. They are primary and necessary and must appear whether or not a real trauma has occurred. The free circulation of these ideas as phantasm is necessary in order to avoid an analytical psychotic countertransference and the production of a folie à deux. The shocks of maternality are primal, even though they appear for the first time in adulthood. This is, again, another point. There is a point, the turning into becoming a real mother is a starting point, like every trauma is. So when we are traumatized and we are looking for the way to think, motherhood, birthing, and so on, it's not about looking into your babyhood. It's about looking into the new transformative, traumatic, and phantasmatic a cluster that appears here for the first time, and that will be a part of the next generation structurization of subjectivity itself. I would say that the shocks of maternality in the first and the second zone that I indicated, the imprints enter the unconscious in the feminine through the female corporeality in its primordial openness to the other. These imprints include traces of non-life coming into life. With non-life, I mean that the parameter cannot only be birth, death. There is also the passage from non-life to a living humanized life. And through the feminine, matern, and the maternal, and the matrixial, this zone can be a zone that we can become aware of. The translation of any desire for non-life into a death wish would, under my understanding, would be a mistake. And we see that in different poets that I analyzed over the time, Alessandra Pizarnik and the Israeli poet Dalia Rabikovic and Sylvia Platt, of course, when they talk about the non-life, it had been interpreted as a desire for death. They are not desiring for death. They desire to go again through that channel of coming from non-life to life, and again from non-life to life. Most of the matrixial notions that you will be reading can easily be deleted or hidden under a more clear-cut analytical ideas. So also the non-life can hide behind the death drive definition, but that's that would be something that with the matrixial ideas I hope to change. Now, how are we in terms of time? Because I wanted to give a few more notions before we move on. The article I referred to, like we did in the last time, I can send you all, those of you who are interested, I can send it to Daniel and he will send it to you. So in our session next week, we can also discuss in more. Daniel, you heard me? I say that I will give you the papers from which I discussed today. So those who wish next week, we can discuss more deep into those notions. I will end with 10 minutes on each different notion now. We have the time?
That's perfect. Absolutely. Yes.
All right. Let's go to Lacan and the RSI, the real, symbolic, and the imaginary, the famous seminar RSI. In that seminar, the primary imaginary or topological form or whatever is the braid or the plate. I don't know which one is correct in English, braid or plate. This one, do you call it braid or plate?
Braid.
Braid. Right. Okay. So he take us to the braid of RSE, with each one thought about as strands that come from, in fact, the same subject. And you have three strands that are circulating. It's a bit better than the Borromean knots. It's a bit easier to imagine. And then if we take each event, each psychic event as having the strand of the real, the symbolic, and the imaginary. Later on, we have also the symptom. This will be 4 strands. The symptom as adding into this braiding possibility so that it puts together in certain ways the R, S, and I. And each with it, and then you can see these events, psychic events over time, and therefore we can move from 4 to 8, from 8 to 12, or from 3 to 6, because we are talking about something that takes place a certain time in a certain described space, and then we have to attend to the time moving. So you move from 3 to 6, from 6 to 9. I suggested, in order to think about the matrixial interweaving, to look at RSI as strands coming from several individuals. So the braid does not intend the individual subject. And the psychic event had been already shareable and shared from the start. On a certain dimension. On another dimension, it is always individual. That's not, of course. So in his seminar, for example, of 13 May 75, he announced that he would stop at 6 strands in time, even though he could go to 9 and etc. And then we have 4 if we add the symptom. But imagine what happened if we realize that we can talk about the composition of the strands arriving from different individuals. So it's not the endless fragmentation. It is not the endless digital stupor on which I will talk in a minute. It is not because it needs our investment also in terms of the real and the virtual and the affective. So imagine that shareable psychic sphere as it appears at every major psychological moment. If the individual breads already present a transgressive feminine psychotic picture, the blurring of the intrapsychic borders between the real, the imaginary, and the symbolic of the same individual, the transgressivity of such interweaving on a transsubjective level would not be conceivable for Lacan, because already even the sexual relation in terms of the feminine are not conceivable. We must conceive it under the sign minus, right? And here I say, we will conceive it under a sign of certain positive possibilities. It will never disappear entirely. It will never disappear entirely unless we move to bestiality, like the second death of for Antigone. It will never entirely appear. It will never entirely disappear. It is transgressive and it is libidinal, and this libido is not sexual in the sense of that we understand about sexuality. In the non-dupe air, how do you call it in English? Le non-dupe air, the seminar of Lacan, where he moved from the knot to the braid. He does that in order to demonstrate something of the impossibility of the feminine, right? He returns to the, and I quoted here at length, the woman does not exist, but a woman can occur when there is a knot, or rather a braid. She ties up a braid. She manages to achieve sexual union. Only this union is the union of the one with two, etc., etc. So what we see here is that when Lacan does succeed somehow to imagine this sexual femininity, he turns it into the language of total transgression and then symbiosis. And we are facing a crisis of huge symbiotic scenario right now on a global level, I might say. But the feminine matrixial transgression is not symbiosis. That's precisely the point. Since we don't move from symbiosis to separation, but we are reattuning the entanglement in a way where we achieve enough separation in order to experience joining and enough jointness in order to articulate the separateness without investing it in all the mechanism of perversion, for example. So I will end with what I began last time when I talked about the digital stupor, to give some, now maybe we are ready to elaborate a bit more, what would be a copoietic scenario and what is engaged in the digital stupor. I will start with the difference between what Lacan calls fascinum, the freezing of the gaze, and stupor. The difference between fascinum and stupor is that though both stand for a freezing effect, in stupor, even fascination is deleted. There's no fascination. Think about the addiction to Instagrams, the addiction to Facebook, and this kind of media. The difference between shock and stupor in its relation to time is that while shock can turn into trauma and then be retroactively retrieved in a process of curative care, stupor cannot motivate such a move. In stupor, not only the past doesn't function as a psychic domain of nourishment and memory, joy, suffering, lamentation, and hope, but also the present. A present now at the service of jouissance combined with impatient future as the immediately now, So we are dealing with new concept of future, with new futurality inside ourselves, with the new media. The psychic future, as we know it, is there in collapse, and psychic past is in crisis. Appears the figure of the instant future navigated by horizontal multiplication of stimuli. The instant future holds and arrests the present. A breathless instant future is rather a new psychic present time unit. The breathless present time unit is at the service of the instant future. It is even a new psychic time where future and past dance in a vicious circle where memory is held at bay. But what we see is the shortening of the past, capacity for memory, and the going together with the shortening of the future, which is in this addiction to the Instagram, for example. Because not everything which is digital is addictive, and of course, technology is not something we are going to be against. The question is how to identify when we enter the new forms of subjectivity and new forms of addiction. The dance repeats itself, its content change. The change of content doesn't influence the mechanism. We experience overfluidity and careless exchanges, transformations, without self-transformation. Instant future units intention toward limited horizon, programmed or in autopoiesis emergence of self-multiplying, reformatted to follow the patterns of our narcissistic patterns and exploit our capacity for co-emergence and the human subject's constituted vulnerability. The gaze screen in symbiosis with the subject I is conditioned by a future partly programmed and partly emergent according to its autopoietic strategies to survive and flourish. So in an amazing way, the new technology captures on this old definition of life drive, again going around this possibility of communicating and affective investment, which the feminine offers us. A gaze screen in symbiosis with subject I is conditioned by a future partly programmed and partly emerging. It is recognized by the subject by jouissance or by anxiety or by both. So what is becoming impossible is the pain, the douleur of lamentation. And what is also becoming impossible is desire. Loving care is impossible. The relations to intimacy, privacy, and loss are under the control of the gaze screen agency in symbiosis. Our creative and potentials of our capacity to enter through compassion, the dimension of a matrixial within visible screen, I call it, is exploited. So what I'm saying here is that we are probably in a hurry. I mean, we are late by 2,000 years to consider the feminine under other in its own, let's say, an other paradigm. And then we are almost at loss in terms of our capacity to be aware of how it is now exploited in political ways, even unimagined until our days. The subject I, as I, is subjugated now to the gaze screen. It is the gaze screen as object petit a, little a, that now have access to desire and becomes a subject-like agent. It is it uses the channels of narcissism and the capacity for symbiosis. Following digital stupor, the effect of addiction under current anxiety is to be expected. What I suggested many years ago is a matrixial non-symbiotic gaze within screen. And this can differentiate itself by awareness to the deadening affective numbness that accompanies the fusion between the eye, the phantasmatic screen gaze, and the virtual real gaze screen. I will give one more tool, if you want, to identify that. And this has to do with deceleration rather than acceleration. Matrixiality defines a new kind of subject where I and non-I, border linking and border spacing with from one another, recognize affective investment and arousal. Awareness and attention to transsubjectivity means that the matrixial sphere will eroticize our creativity on its own terms and allow for the discernment ethics attentive to each alliance we are forming, because each matrixial alliance engages both the aesthetic and the ethics. It is not a kind of a web of web which can wildly go endlessly fragmenting ourselves. Subjectivity as encounter and the matrixial time can evade the stupor of hyperconnectivity. And here again, bring to your mind, as a metaphor at least, pregnancy. In a matrixial non-symbiotic I with non-I differentiation, what I see is that freedom cannot be tied to the newly, entirely new, to the imaginary newness of a newborn. A freedom rift appears in a passage composed with the jointness. Birth with birthing demands a decelerated time-space duration. The decelerated time-space duration of gravidity is originary. We have it in us, not because of our DNA and genetics, but because of the long process that it takes. You know, it takes for the flower to open, and it takes for us to arrive from non-life to life. And even if the maternal subject wish for that, if we are to be born, there is no way to accelerate certain processes. We have it in us, the possibility at least to be aware when we are deprived of the possibility for deceleration. And when we are deprived of it, we become objects, object of a desire of something and not subjects. The symbolic birth with birthing, based on the originary corporeal jointness in differentiation, indicates the potentiality for ethical alliances where the vulnerability of each subject that stems from archaic vulnerability and from self-relinquishment, self-fragilization is recognized. So I will just end by saying that the trans-individual connectivity can be indifferent to the human. It happens in any case, and it is now very popular to articulate it in philosophy, this endless trans-individual connectivity, but that's not the trans-subjective. Because the hyperconnectivity does not care for the humane. And the matrixial transsubjectivity is based upon the care. That's why I needed the concept here, the carians, what it is composed of. How can we recognize this kind of concerning, which is humanizing. So deceleration is not the opposite of acceleration. Technique can go on accelerating and we can use it happily ever after. But it is a path and a medium for a different dimension of psychic time, where senseful co-emergence, attentive to the other's vulnerability and to our own emotional and intellectual path and hurts can't take place. You see, the struggle right now is, there's a lot of thinking we invest in with Lacan for sure, that each session, each analytical intervention is a re-establishing of the past. Lacan put a lot of emphasis on the way that while interpreting, while being in the session, whatever it is, which is called past is that which we have now formulated here and now. And this is, with his passage to structure, it is very clearly. And what I'm saying that with the matrixial, we also open different horizons concerning futurality and the future. And that we have passed another revolution, technological revolution, since the time Lacan even worked, let alone Freud. And that the language of the matrixial, I hope, can on the one hand allow us to enlarge the notion of subject, to realize what is at stake in terms of environment and vision of future, and also taken a few openings to understand the maternal as subject, not object, and transsubjectivity, and the feminine. And finally, I dedicated less time to the feminine than I wanted. I prepared the whole thing here, but hopefully I facilitate your reading by now, so we can open it maybe to questions.
Yes. Wonderful presentation. Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to invite, I'll change the view so we can see each other on gallery. Hello, everyone. Bracha, if I may, and while people are thinking and formulating, and we certainly want to invite Ellie and Jameson and others to jump in, I just wanted to suppose something. You know, in seminar 17, this very cryptic session of Lacan where he invokes something about Heidegger and technology, and he calls a certain zone of technological life the eleuthosphere, okay? And he describes the way that the speech is different. The speech of the human, the speaking being, is different in this technological sphere. And he invokes he suggests a problem of sublimation. And he suggests that objects will take on a different quality, what he calls latouze, which is a very strange kind of homophony for like the babble of babies that would exist in this type of sphere. So my question is, when you're referring to the digital stupor, are you thinking of this, or does that at all work for you? Because I find that session from seminar 17 so provocative. And I wonder if you agree and how you might think these kinds of notions of the object, including the latouze, including even the later notion of the escabeau.
How will you translate the latouze?
Lathouse. Latouze. It's
no, but to English.
I think it's well, what it actually is a derivative of is, I think, the word being from the Greek. It's one of those neologisms that is like very complex. I don't know how you would translate it to English is the answer. I don't know if others know. Does anyone have a sense of that? This is something that a lot of people have commented on, and I've written about it myself. But anyways, I'm just wondering if I could invite your reflections on the digital stupor and sublimation, okay? If you have any thoughts on this, is one thing that came to mind in the latter part of your talk.
It's interesting because it is really showing us how much more urgent it is to elaborate notions for our time. I mean, each time we discover it from a different angle. If we think about Freud, when Freud talks about the, paranoia is always the voices, right? You hear voices, the metaphors. Imagine a family environment where until the age of 4 or 5 or 6, everything that is composed together. You see the father, you hear the father, you see the mother, you hear the mother. We discussed, it's funny, we discussed this with Felix Guattari like in the 80s. We came to that question. Later on, what the experience of Freud, and you see it when you go in Eastern countries, still in St. Petersburg on some houses, you see these big speakers, and we know that during the war, people, if you heard that voice, which is not what you hear physically, and it came from this haute-parleur telling you the news about the war, later on used to control people in the camps and in the ghettos and so on. Then you get into the period where Lacan is developing his theory and also developing a life. And the big thing is first the telephone, the separation between bodies, but still hear one another. The metaphors of the voice is going all kind of, we talked about it at first, the voice, he gave the shofar as the sense behind the sense behind the spoken had always had the physical presence of another body. You see it, you smell it, and so on. And suddenly we have this split, and we've got the telegraph where everything is written, and the telephone where we hear also the sound and the voice. And the big thing was the telegraph. And then the fax, It has nothing to do with that. And this is also why the imaginary had a certain position. And you could take the symbolic, put the imaginary somehow at the service of the symbolic, pay attention to the symbolic, enter the real through the voice, through the resonance behind it, and reorganize the imaginary and so on. Now we live in a world where the signifiers are, when we talk about the digital stupor, the signifiers are basically images. Images replace certain, what he would call letters, right? Now, at the time where everybody was splitting in the Lacanian field, and I think that Ellie can testify to all of that, there was this anti-Oedipus and endless fragmentation, like the opposite of the feminine would be to split it into endlessly in terms of Deleuze and Guattari, and to get it into foreclosure in terms of Lacan and so on. We have another social sphere where images are much more in the symbolic than our language have to redefine in any case a lot of transgression. I did I think a paper to analyze the lamella, this beautiful passage in Lacan that I really love. But we do see that finally it enters the big notions of life drive and death drive as defined in Beyond the Pleasure Principle, even though he went so far away. Now, there is in principle something that turns, which Lacan could not, he hinted, but he could not actualize an apparatus, a symbolic apparatus for that, which is that we cannot, finally, I would say there is an other of the other. So the matrixial is an other of the other of the whole, this, there is a relation, but it is not, it is libidinal, but it's not sexual. And so all of those fields have to be reoriented, and the enormity of this slip moving between images, which was starting slowly, you know, and then turned into what we see now. Even my own matrixial field, when I wrote about it, and I said that it is not the web of the webs. It will not be a web of all the webs, that the web of all the webs will be phallic again. We are living another phallic machine again and trying to find a resistance, but not reactive. In my writing, sometimes I explain that there are some arousals that are not reactive. They are arousals of a different kind. They are very easily become reactive when they are confronted with the phallic notions. So compassion very, very easily can be drawn into the service of something else because it is so delicate and demand our self-fragilization. And it works in certain, but it's not a word. It engages the symbolic, the real. So I would say that, yeah, with all the lamentation that it takes, we live in another future, another past, and another present. And the child of today, when he hears a shout, it could be the television. The child, when Freud was a baby, when he heard the father shout, it would have been his father or the neighbor. I mean, the way even to start to understand where did all these objective strands enter is new. And so to catch up on the feminine means to catch up on a lot of generations, and also on what was happening in the 70s, in the theory, in the Lacanian theory, where finally everything landed in the land of non-possibility, impossible relations, and so on. While with the matrixial, it is impossible not to be in a shareable space, even when we are alone. We are alone, but we are connecting or transconnecting in different ways. Even our concept of what is to be alone, I think, was entirely phallic also. I don't need to separate this and this and that and come like that in order to feel alone. And so I would say it's not enough. I mean, he did what he could, but he admits even, I translated the very last seminars of Lacan to Hebrew. And I saw the rock, the place where, you know, it still remains, you know, that nobody can talk about the feminine. And if you do, you become hysterical. Maybe Ellie can tell us about that. If you do, you are hysterical. And if you don't, you know, it's because it's impossible. So between the possibilities left for the feminine, yeah, we remained in big trouble.
Ellie, would you like to speak?
Yes, yes, I would. Bracha, that was so nurturing, so fulfilling. It's hard to know where to begin. But I wanted to just compliment you on one thing that I don't think I've ever heard anybody else talk in that way. But that is when you use the idea of the compassion that you have to have for your patient, at the same time that you have to make sure that it not become narcissistic or some kind of love, but it takes into account the real pain, and the analyst acts on that. It's not just silent, mute. I mean, I'm sure you can be silent and muted and have compassion, but I like that very much. I like that part. I had a question about an earlier part in the paper when you said the mother can't be foreclosed. I understood you to say the mother can't be foreclosed. And my understanding is that the mother is foreclosed by the psychotic. So I wasn't sure about that, because you also talked later about the psychotic too. So I wasn't sure where you would fall on that.
Yeah, this is a fantastic remark, Ellie. Brilliant as always.
Thank you.
I would say that then maybe some parts of the seminars are psychotic, because the foreclosure, you know, you can, for example, if we want to start with Freud, our father, Freud says in the structuring of narcissism that in order for the child to develop, the child, he doesn't say boy or girl, cannot tolerate to miss on something which can be very, very important. So he cannot tolerate that he would not have, for example, the womb, you know, and therefore he invents a theory that children are born from the anus. And Freud then continued to explain what is the generalized child fantasy of children born from the anus. And this includes girls and includes boys. This is the normal development, is to go through that. Now we have to question right immediately, what do you mean by that? Which narcissism we fortify the child, the neutral child? What narcissism the child fortifies when he will not admit the womb? So this is kind of normalizing development in terms of foreclosure. And I say, okay, so Freud can say for the male child, this would be too painful, you know? He says it like this: the child must own anything which is valuable, and therefore the child must own the penis or be envy of the penis. It is not because of sexuality, it is because of narcissism, how we understand what is our value in the world. And so there is a tilt, It starts with Freud, it continues with other, it arrives, now Lacan tries to organize that when he says, well, nothing of all of that have to do with your body and so on. We start from the symbolic. This was the first evolution. We start from language and structures and so on, and therefore everything is imaginary. And so whether you lose what you have or you lose what you don't have, it's all imaginary. But then Lacan himself becomes more concerned with the real as time goes by. And then you have new problems. Then the real imaginary. Now, the only way to start something else for me was from the real, and then not accepting the real as that which escapes all the other domains, but in between being and nothingness, in between, in the connectivity and so on. So we are addressing the foreclosure in culture, and probably this digital stupor I'm talking about has to do more with psychosis than with anything that we know. So that's why I say this remark is very important. And if I go to Daniel, yes, I addressed the paper to compare Lacan, Freud, and Heidegger concerning the question of ethics and finally also sublimation. Because if we say that sublimation leans on the split, this is one way of putting what is the meaning of sublimation. If I say there is another domain where split is not working, where there are transformation of another kind, this means another domain, of course, another domain of sublimation. And I dedicated to that also a few papers if you're interested, because I'm interested to link all that to art and to painting. So, but you know, we had one libido, then we had one major mechanism of making sense, and then we had, and that's overcoming that is not going to the multiple, but it's going to the several, each time other, but few, where compassion can enter the scene, not as a word, not as a signifier, but as a movement of caring and carrying what we care. And to carry, you know, I never liked the term contain, because again, I'm thinking about it as artist. It's not about containing or the other, or that which is not me, or that which arrived from other generation or from another to me. It is about carrying it, caring and caring. Now, where Lacan could not advance is where he associated fascination with the freezing of the gaze. Now, if there would not have been another fascination or admiration of the other and of, then, yeah, then we would have stayed in that. It goes together, the paradigm goes together, another kind of understanding of fascination. And so we can become aware where it is exploited, become fascinants and deadening and freezing, and where fascination opens you to the other and the world. In the paper Fascinance, I talk about this sublimation a lot, where, you know, when Dora, the patient of Freud, stand in front of the Madonna, and Freud say, what did you have to look at that for 2 hours? Why? And she says, the Madonna. Now, she was looking to receive something from that painting that she could not receive anywhere else. And this takes deceleration. And here fascination is not, you know, killing life, but giving life.
Right.
So that's what I mean, Eli. You see that whatever it is that could be foreclosed, but it is on a zone which is so delicate and fragile and vulnerable, just let it be. And we realize it doesn't have to fall into anxiety.
Right.
Like Freud said that we feel the anxiety in the session and the anxiety in general, that, you know, there was this discussion. Because when something appears from the past or from archaic modus, it is accompanied by anxiety. So is it an anxiety that existed in the past and because of anxiety we repressed? Or is anxiety related to the return of the repressed? If anxiety is related to the return of the repressed, then it is now in the session and it is up to us to feel with it and realize what kind of affect was there in the archaic domain. Then we would not rush to think that everything was horrible and the mother and father and all this agenda, because we will realize that the anxiety is now. In the uncanny, there is this wonderful passage where Freud himself says, maybe, when the patient dreams that he's in a womb, right now it tells me then it is full of anxiety. It's like a grave, like tomb. But at the time it was repressed, it was not an anxiety, it is not castration. It was, with castration, we can imagine a situation which was frightening at the basis and frightening when you think about it. And then everything that is connected to these primal maternal fantasies I'm talking about perhaps was not frightening in the beginning. It is retroactively frightening because it comes around with a lot of anxiety. But this anxiety could have been compassion. Mm-hmm. It didn't have to be anxiety in the beginning, and it's difficult to sustain compassion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very interesting.
May we have a queue forming of questions. Some I can read, some I want to call upon people. Let's begin with Jameson for her question, and then we can, if you can keep it kind of concise, that would be good for purpose of time. We have about 40 minutes left.
Thank you. Bracha, so I don't know, it's really reorienting how I'm thinking about things, especially because obviously you worked so much on l'étourdi, the last session and this session, but then you completely undo it because you take away the non-rapport, the no other of the other, and the no woman. So it's a very fascinating move to do with that text. And I remembered in La Troisième, I was surprised by Lacan saying at a certain moment that we had to rethink the woman from the perspective of the phallus as parasexual. He makes this joke. He says, the woman's kind of like a car to a man. She's a fake woman. And he says, and there is a way to think about the sexual that wouldn't be parasexual, and that's by virtue of the knot and the braid, which was obviously so important today. And there's two books that came out in the last month that are getting a lot of attention. One is No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood, and another one is The Life of the Mind. And in both books, the women are in a kind of stupor. One is actually an internet stupor. She can't get out of the internet. The other one, she's an academic and she can't get out of her own mind. And the only thing that pushes them out, one has a miscarriage and the other one's sister has a baby that's going to die, that she and her sister take up the act of caring for this child. And she actually describes then at that point being able to come back to her body and being able to come back to a voice that's living or a body that's real and feels something. And so one thing I was wondering about in terms of the internet stupor, if there's, it's not, in terms of a foreclosure of the feminine or this kind of stupefaction that accelerates time and is a kind of numbness and shock, but if there's a hope, that there's a desire to go into this non-life space and emerge, which is obviously a paradoxical act on the part of patients, but nevertheless, because I think a lot of what you're saying about the push towards differentiation or the push towards a cut or the push towards individuation is not going to work, which the patients talk about not being able to find in incredible detail in sessions, that they're looking for that and discovering that it doesn't in fact work for them and have to then search differently. you know, and maybe it's only because they come to analysis to articulate something like this that they can search differently. And unfortunately, everyone else is in the drift and the stupor. But I mean, if it's up to us, we can hear that, you know, to come to these two, I think, positions that you're talking about, either through the matrixial or through the kind of phallic differentiation.
Yeah.
Anyways, those are my thoughts. All thanks to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think it's wonderful, because with the matrixial, I hope we can realize also in the session itself and in different relations in life, and also in art, also in the question of sublimation, what it takes to transconnect to whatever, and then it is aborted. You lose it and it has not yet been birthed. We are not even allowed to mourn it. We are afraid of a language that will talk about this passage from non-life. We are, you know, sensorized to think about it, because when we do, we are afraid that the pro-life people, those anti-abortion people, will jump on it and will take it to their side. But with the matrixial, what I'm saying about this kind of processes in life, during the session, in analysis, that nobody outside of those co-emergence can speak for any of its elements or any of its subjects or objects. So when we talk about, even when we talk about, imagine about fetus and abortion and miscarriage and birthing and pregnancy, whoever imagined that he can talk in the interests of the fetus is living in a phallic universe, which we have to, I mean, the whole matrixial will not allow that intervention. For some women, that loss goes, they will not, they did not fantasize on it and they will not mourn it. For other, it's a whole universe that collapses. But in terms of the life itself and in terms of the session, when we bring into account the matrixial, we also bring into account, on some ways, the body, female body, transgender body, male body. A person with a male body can feel a great loss that he cannot carry children. We have to learn the language of what is those feminine dimension in the subject, in males and in females and in women and in mothers and non-mothers. And your question about the digital stupor is, what I'm saying is that indeed there is a loss of time in the history of formulating the feminine, and I don't know how we can bridge on that. How can you bridge 2000 years? You know, sometimes I say, I do it in my work, that anything that culture produced and I like, I take and I read. So I will never say I will not read Shakespeare because he's a man, or I will not read the Bible because women even hardly have names in the Bible, or and there is no prophet, a woman. So anything that touch me has enough of whatever it is that give me desire to live, that seduces me, and I will analyze and I see. And then when I do that, I realize how when you have a certain new perspective, you find new material in the same very, very old story. I analyze the story of Maria pregnant with Jesus, and I found in the text, and the text is so minimal, I found enough hints to relate to different matrixial notions that, so on the one hand, we have to realize history, we have to realize sociology, then we say, what does it mean politically? It's huge. It's huge. And we live in that period where there's, in that digital stupor, the body, you know, forgets to eat, forget to drink, forgets to, is addictive in terms of, in terms that, bring around all the apparatus of perversion finally, how something becomes object, to be controlled or to be controlled by. We are controlled by the gaze if we go with Lacan. And all that at the same time. It's a huge, now also to turn the values a bit differently. If we put value on communicating rather than only communicating, communicating, what does it demand of us? Of compassion as a compassion, alternating, regulating, readjusting our passion, not only to the subject, which would be easy, empathy to another subject, but the whole universe the other bring with, that's more difficult. So the matrixial also touches about how we think strangeness, how we think the other, why we reject the other, what can we do that will be different, not symbiosis, not rejection, something else. But I'm not very optimistic, but you know, Sisyphus was not optimistic also. You have to move on.
Thank you very much.
When I wrote my first article on the matrixial, I mean, real article in terms of psychoanalysis, I told Griselda, who is now editing me, that it will take 25 years before it will be heard. And so she have to stick 25 years. And if she believes there's something in it, because the area to cover is very big, is ethics, aesthetics, philosophy, that I don't reject. I just say that's not enough. Being towards death, the Heidegger notion, it's true, it's not enough. It is also being towards birth with birthing, whether we are mothers or not. We have this horizon, and we cannot formulate birth in terms of the phallic, and therefore Hannah Arendt is to put into question, and all this idea of newness. So we have to do it all the time. With Kristeva, it's finally keeping the phallic paradigm intact when she says that we can only think about pregnancy in terms of psychosis. I know we were left with this, with our good old Lacan, but it's not enough.
We have a few there's one question that has formed a lot of interest from Arturo, and I'll just read this for the sake of time. Can you expand on the notion of the sub-real? Is it topological? What is its relationship to the RSI? And should we think of it as a fourth or fifth ring? Or does it designate a difference internal or extimate to the real?
At the stage where I am in my own thought, I would add another ring or stream. Because, okay, imagine that we are talking at each moment in terms of subject, RSI in terms of the subject, and then even in terms of intersubjectivity. So you might have this trio or fourth and another trio, and now take it to the partial level. take it to the partial level, meaning that we are in that zone of subject versus in fantasy versus the lacking or becoming a little a, okay, take it there. And then imagine at that level of, which is already partial, let's talk on partial subjects, partial objects, and so on to make it, to facilitate it. Now, what if those, let's imagine these few partial subjects instances interfering, relating, connecting on a certain level and not connecting on another level? This is not cannot be formulated in terms of the subject as it captures itself again to its own individuality, and it's not psychotic losing all boundaries, but on some level we are now transconnecting, and on another, not we, yeah? Partial subjectivity is in us, in the other, and this you can imagine might go unnoticed, while other relations stronger than those are noticed. Now, on that level, it wouldn't be possible if we take it into a shareable I and non-I sphere. It will not be possible to either talk about this split or to talk about this mixture or fusion. It would be wrong to, we need this level. Now, why it is more important today than ever, in a sense, and why it becomes a dimension, the sub-real is not the real. It does not correspond to the either presence or loss, and it does not correspond to the in-between. You remember the late Lacan talk about the in-between being and loss and so on, to locate the feminine, by the way, because it's not in the same subject. Now, I think that in 100 years ago, when we have our classical psychoanalysis, we could still talk about what we call now partial subjects and somehow determine the coordinates. But today, like in the example I gave before, it is quite almost impossible to name the coordinates that enter each shareable moment. So in this shareability, it is what sometimes I say the kernels speak, kernel to kernel, or that while something becomes object, at the same time it becomes a transconnected instance, which in general, in a more practical way, means that compassion is not only to be seen as that which we strive to arrive at, but as a modus of connecting which occurs all the time, which works. Now, it is possible, for me it is possible, but because I take a lot of time in my painting processes, I think it was more had to do with painting when I realized what went on between parts of, you know, what comes from the outside, what comes from me, what inspires me, what I'm not aware that inspires me. And all of that takes a lot of time to realize that the sub-real is not the real, neither in the early definition, not in the late definition. And it's not exact, it has to do with the corporeality, but it's not exactly the body. And we cannot anymore organize so nicely the oral drive, the partial objects are related, object of oral drive, object of anal, object. It's not anymore, we're not there. We can take into account other sensitivities and sensibilities and affects, and some of them, while they are working, it's difficult to put our finger on it, but that's why we are here in the analytical room. So yeah, this transconnectivity is working while we communicate on other levels. So I would say that it's, for me, it's definitely an addition. It is like, it takes me again to really the 80s in Paris, when I was very close to Francisco Varela, and he was talking about autopoiesis, and I was talking about copoiesis. Because the autopoietic machine is here to see what fits it and to amalgamate with that which can give it more life and thrive and so on. It's autopoiesis because of that, not because there are no outside world. Copoiesis already in principle have to accept the subjective partiality of the other and the outside, which is not really outside. So if we take the topological topologies that we talked last week, and we see how each of them negotiates in a different way inside and outside, now you start to negotiate inside and outside of those several subject or object or subject and object and entities that enter what I call an encounter event, which goes on all the level. Finally, encounter event, really on the level of the thing, on the level of object, on the level of subject, and me and the world. How do we, it is with that that we can enter certain alterity without hurting it and without controlling it. But we cannot just either, we say, okay, we cannot, we should not control, and therefore finally we arrive into a culture of abandonment. We cannot abandon, and that's a part of the feminine matriciality that is not abandoning, but is non-abandonment by definition. And this kind, if it guides you also on the ethical level, it means what you do when you are, when you have to take decisions. You mentioned the last time, so we mentioned also now this rescue operation that I was leading. And of course was very traumatic for me, and I remember this was not my job. I was not, nobody learns how to do that. But I heard all kind of, from different radios, and I understood that a ship is drowning, that it got missiles. And I called the chief, the Central Army room, and they asked me if they distribute champignon, if I'm hallucinating. And so, and I thought that if people are dying, then I don't have time to get okay from everybody. So I just entered into and organized an operation in a hospital and all of that. And it was between me and the blue sky, you know. But what guides us in a moment of, you know, traumatic moments? What guides us? So there is flight and there is fight, and this is what we know in a certain, but there are other things. Simply we don't give them value. So if we give them value through the feminine, and the feminine maternal, which we do not agree to cut and say that's something totally different. It's not the same, but it's not entirely different, at least in terms of what we inherited, because we have all been born. If we have all been born, we know the resonance of, we are talking about, we don't need to be mothers in order to know something about it. And so we have this capacity to decide on a level which does not at all, you know, pay in a sense, is crazy. Now, how do you take decisions that are out of the normal order. So how do you understand the world in which you're not pre-programmed in a sense? So it's all related, at least in the way that what I try to make sense of in my own life, which is giving birth, having abortion, having miscarriage, giving birth to, you know, a dead baby that is not going to be born, then another birth, and that's an experience we have to learn from and share.
I think it's worth honoring the memory and the legacy of a former professor at the EGS who actually died in the act of saving a drowning child named Anne Dufourmontel. I'm sure you know her.
Of course, of course.
For those of us that studied with her, it was a profound inspiration. So really reminds me of what you're saying of her life. So Wilfred, I'm just going to ask two questions. We have 5 minutes left to hit the 2-hour mark, but maybe we can extend. It's okay with you? Okay. I'm
fine. And I would like those who want to ask, I would like, or interfere, I would like to hear them. I'm okay.
Let's go. Wilfred, go ahead. You're muted.
Ellie, you have to mute your micro.
Yes.
Yes,
you mentioned that hate and empathy were necessary to maintain both. I do have a patient who was having a very bad father who shouted, and later it turned out that he was homosexual, and he now left the marriage. The lady is in her early 20s, has had several psychotic breakdowns, and sometimes she hates her father, and sometimes she has compassion with the father and feels guilty about that. Is your suggestion to allow her to tolerate the tension between hate and empathy rather than just hate him? That was my position within the Lacanian framework, that somehow a third should be maintained. But I am wondering if your ideas could provide some justification.
Yeah, my definition is empathy to the patient, within compassion to any figure that the patient brings to the session. Because if the patient talks about her father, it's a theater of emotions that will still come. And how do we know? We are not, she will continue to have compassion and to have hate and to express just anything she needs to express. The task is for us, as those who listen, not to enter projective identification and not to start to say, yes, your father was this and that, not to, that us in our own psyche will not freeze will not translate her anger and pain into a frozen hate. And this means to be very careful when we speak. I mean, you might maintain empathy to everything she expresses. You don't have to defend the father or the mother or anybody. It's enough that you realize and you remember that at the same time that she puts the father as an object of anger or this or that. It is also a subject in transsubjective connectedness to herself. So if you start to hate her father in this projective identification process, it's like a time bomb. She will be relieved maybe in the session, but it will turn against her later on. She will be later on more devastated. So as long as there is a capacity to tolerate anger and compassion and all of that, you will see in time that it is possible to, when you go like with Melanie Klein, what we learn is first of all, you attack all your objects and then you start reparation. You love them as a reparative. And this in a lot of analytical practices, this is the practice. Let's hate first, and then sometimes if we join that practice, in the end of the road, we will find nothing because there is a risk to fall into this spiral of hating the object. While inside we are still very transconnected and unable even to confess to ourselves or to the analyst. We become ashamed that we are not, all the time hating or something. So it's very good to contain all that and keep in mind when is it empathy without compassion to just anything. Like when Winnicott say, I hate your mother, that's the end of it, She's good for hospitalization. Or even when Freud gently, very gently, undermined the mother of Dora. So this horrible woman, that nobody loves. This is also a time bomb because Dora, right now she's relieved because she's the young daughter and she's very attractive and that's wonderful, it gives her joy. But we have to keep it in the biggest picture and the futuralities. She knows that one day she will have the age of the mother. Another person will have the age she has now. If she starts to devaluate the value of that maternal figure or Mrs. K, which is not attractive enough and so on, one day she will think of herself like somebody who does not deserve the appreciation and the value and so on. So keep the future time in mind as well. How the patient can become a mother if she thinks that the parent in general is only a terrifying. I would say that if there is a real, trauma, rape or murder, that's one thing. But usually what we meet is always ambiguities. And on the subreal level, it's not exactly ambiguities. There are connections. If we cut them, we cut the matricial web itself. And that's, well, that's for another lecture. So I think you're doing okay when you keep all the elements that enter the field. You don't need to add burning into that.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I think I want to ask, while you're here, Bracha, you mentioned a third session. I think there's interest, obviously, in a third session. I wonder, would you like to do that next time?
I was joking.
You were joking.
No,
okay.
It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. I mean, I can take another session with you.
Okay.
You're very lovely, but I was joking.
Okay. Yeah. Let us do this. So we have a question from Marina, but I don't know if Marina already, some of this autopoiesis was already discussed. So your question may have been answered. If not, you can jump in and say your question. We have another one from Michael Fisher. which is about acceleration. And in your view of acceleration and deceleration, does this entail moving beyond virtues versus vices? So something there about that from Michael Fisher. I don't know, Michael, if you wanted to say more, or is he gone? Is it okay? Okay, okay. So you can address that one. And Marina, are you covered with your question?
Let me hear a few questions. Let me hear a few questions.
We have another one from Tim, although Tim, I think you want to verbalize yours. And then we have a longer question from Anna. And Anna, I would invite you also to take the floor and ask your question. Or I can read it actually. So what is still perplexing for me is that in the article about woman to woman, girl to mother, the matrixial relationship, it seems to me that you are talking about the girl's position. But how is the trans-subjective matrixial position of the woman mother different from that? How is she trans-related to the girl woman? What is in it for her except for ethical responsibility? You also talk about asymmetry in these feminine matrixial links. And obviously this means the recognition that the intensity of compassion is not equal. But how can this asymmetry not lead to hysteria then? What is there in the mother to woman trans connection that counters this tendency towards hystericization?
Yeah. Okay, all excellent things. Indeed, in the paper I gave you, the fascinance, the woman to woman difference, the emphasis, the point of view was the daughter. And the two examples that I used were, it is where I speak from the author is Dora. The author is Lol Stein, the figure of Marguerite Duras, which is a daughter. And there is an amazing moment that I analyze and I hope it helps to understand that, in Lol Stein's story, the Lol, the woman is going to be married. She goes to a party and she sees her lover, the one who is going to marry her. In front of her eyes, he falls in love with another woman. So all the criteria should be she's jealous, she's envious, she's crazy out of, and she's hysterical, and we got all that. Even Lacan analyzed that, and a series of men analyzed that. But Marguerite Duras says about her, the woman with whom the lover falls in love, he hints she was a mother. He fell in love with a figure which is a mother. And what could be reduced to envy and hysteria and whatever, we have to suspend it. In my paper, I say, hold it for a moment. Let's listen to what she says. She says there is a moment of eternity that could go on forever and ever and ever. She was unhappy when she was separated from this scenario, because the scenario was an imaginary primal sin, finally. Because what does it mean she suffers that she was cut from the situation? It means she did not have enough time to elaborate all these negotiations between being a woman, being a lover, being a daughter, being a mother. It's exactly like the situation of Dora in front of the Madonna. Does she see a mother? Does she see a pregnant woman? Does she see herself? Does she see a virgin woman? So all of these negotiations needs this deceleration. If I go back to the question of this deceleration in which it takes time to elaborate all these psychic strings that goes between, and give them language. When we don't, it drops into the pile of psychosis and hysteria and so on. Now, in the paper Fascinance, it's really going into the view of the daughter. I can indicate and send to Daniel 2 papers in which I go to the viewpoint of the mother. And the asymmetry is the asymmetry of responsibility. It's not like somebody is better than somebody else. But in each encounter, it's very rare. If we talk about vulnerability, it's very rare to have symmetrical responsibility. In the analytical session, the analyst is responsible, even though the analyst and the patient might be just equal on any terms we might think about. But we are aware of our responsibility to the other, and which takes us to other questions, which are ethical questions, and what we call something which is valorized and something which is minimalized. Well, it's not in every situation. The paradigmatic situation is analysis, and also the artist and her material. So I think that we will be able to discuss the question more deeply after reading the articles where I analyze the paternal and maternal position, and then put it together. I cannot separate it will be another lecture again, as I said, not the fourth one. Just
we'll talk about
yeah,
it.
But it's certainly, I will give you some papers that will be giving more perspective on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Let us do this. I think maybe our last question can come from Timothy Levens. He has a question which other people are interested in. And so, Tim, would you mind just verbalizing your question?
Yes, I can try. In one of the articles, I was fascinated by the term a surplus of fragility, which is created in the border swerving when the individual boundaries are dissolving. And I thought immediately of surplus jouissance and what the relation between the surplus of fragility and the surplus jouissance could be. And then the second level of that question would be the link of that to art working, and maybe what your personal experience is in art working with this self-fragilization process.
Yeah.
And the surplus that comes from that.
Yeah. Yes, you're right. Of course, I suppose that the idea to use surplus of fragility comes from surplus of jouissance. And it's not even of fragility, it is of, correct me if I'm wrong, I think I talked about the surplus of fragility in terms of self-fragilization, so that we allow ourselves to be, to feel whatever is going on in the field of encounter event from a position which is less that gives up some of our own force or our own position. Now, in the surplus of jouissance, we know how it is not about I feel better or worse. it could be more joy, and it could be more pain. It is not at all, it usually will mark certain suffering. When I talk about the core, the compassion, and we know that compassion leads us to a certain tunnel, you know, and passion, the passion is also suffering, is between desiring, suffering, it's between desire and jouissance, it's between trauma and fantasy, and so on. And I don't remember exactly where I used that term, but it's important because the border swerving, thank you for bringing it up. We could have asked, why do I need border swerving? I talk about border linking, and I talk about border spacing, rather than entire separation, and the differentiation always in jointness. Why would I talk about border swerving? And this brings into account, indeed, moments that are traumatic. It's like what Jameson was bringing about. The border swerving demands that we reattune everything that we have been attuned to up till that moment. So indeed, to swerve, something is folded. We see processes or events, and then suddenly something entered the field. Your sister gave birth, The whole web, the whole matrixial web related to this is going to reorganize itself. And that point, it takes you to this surplus of fragility to give room to that which was not expected.
Well, Carolina has one quick reading recommendation. She says, you mentioned how the analyst's intervention may break the matrixial, but I'd be interested in how other things, events, processes of signification may pose a threat to the matrixian.
Again, sorry. I was suddenly attracted to read the chat. You have to photograph the chat for me because I think I missed many things. I didn't look at it.
There's a lot there. Yes, that's true.
There's a lot there. So you will take care of it, and I listen to you again.
Okay, you want me to read it? I can read it.
No, you tell me again what is the question. Yeah.
Okay. So Carolina asks, you mentioned how the analyst's intervention may break the matrixial. I would be interested in how other things, events, processes of signification may pose a threat to the matrixial link, and how can we nurture this, both aesthetically and ethically? So any suggestions on things that you've written about as it pertains to this question? Or thoughts also?
I would say that a lot of it is addressed in the Uncanny O and Uncanny Compassion, this paper. And also in the paper that I wrote when I published a discussion with Emmanuel Levinas. So I don't know if you have it, but I can send it to you. Because of course it's a huge, huge question. I would say that the principle, the basic principle would be to ask ourselves when we produce an intervention, whether we are contributing out of identification, super hyper identification with the baby position or child position, how we contribute to the eviction of some principle, element or object or subject from the web itself. And it's very much related to what Alfred was asking. We might introduce terms that that contribute to the total eviction of a figure from the matrixial web, and this could result in a catastrophe even if we don't see it on the spot. We have to imagine it on different time zones and level stages in life. Now, on art and all of that, again, I mean, there's so much to say, I wouldn't even dare. I don't know where to start. But I promise that anybody who wants to know how I'm thinking art in this, I can also send all kind of indications. I don't want to go to generalize. Wouldn't be useful. If we share the same material and read it, then I could, you know, enter into a certain sentence and interpret it or bring more. But art is huge, and we have to even ask what is art. I did once in 2005 or 6. We did a long performance in the Trans-Siberian train, where a few people took the Trans-Siberian train, starting from Finland, going to Moscow, and then ending in Beijing. And my performance had to do with, I was asking everybody, what is art? And I took note of all the replies I had, and every day there were new replies. And by the end of the trip, we all had a very interesting argument and even almost, you know, fight on what is art. It's a huge question. But I would say, remember that when the patient trusts us, the patient had enough trust in the archaic figures, and now we benefit from it. To think that it trusts me because I'm special, but never trusted his father or his mother or somebody, will be our delusion. And we can see it in case history is reported in literature, how much of this delusion analysts can keep. So they are wonderful, but the mother is horrible, father is psychotic, and so on. If the patient gives you a sense of loving, then it had been already a possibility and a capacity, and we have to appreciate that we received the gift that was already, somebody else shared it before. And so we can take less place there. We can have a paternal position, but we are not the father. And we can have maternal position, but we did not carry the patient 9 months in our, we did not feed him for the beginning of its life. We have to learn that this position is shared. We don't enter the position of the father and take its place. Replacement is a splitting. I take my place beside the other archaic figures, even if and when they failed. In analysis, we majorly talk about what failed, but also we have to realize and to understand that most of the processes of love, we don't know about them because it's like good nourishment. You metabolize it and you move on and you grow. So we don't even pay attention to it, but it's our task, at least in theory and also in the practice, to pay attention to that, which goes without saying. Mostly trauma remains, and the daily whatever goes without saying and remains hidden. So it's about the position of the analyst also. And this takes us again into the huge field of elaboration, because is the analyst, you know, the sujet supposé savoir, the one who he's supposed to know, taking, and then at the end of the process rejected like the little object A. That's one way, one of the things that happened, alongside other things that happen. It's a real alliance. So we have to think, what are the terms of alliance?
I do want to honor Irene Sullivan, who emailed several questions. Perhaps you could forward those to Bracha, perhaps, or you can speak now briefly if you have a little more time, maybe 5 minutes, if that's okay.
I don't hear you. Microphone. Irene is without mic.
Yeah. There you go.
If Bracha
Oh, no, wait. Hold on. Okay, try it now. There you go.
Okay. If Bracha is okay with it, I would love to forward the questions to her, because they do stream through what we discussed last week. And I don't think 5 minutes is fair to either her or I or anyone else who's listening.
Muted.
It's up to you. We do have a session of questions and answer and people elaborating more, right? Do we, Danielle?
This was envisioned to be that moment, but I think absolutely, I think that we can plan a third. We can discuss the details offline, but we would love to do a follow up. Yes.
In any case, Irene and others, if I receive a question for which I can indicate a reading that I can suggest, this for sure I will do, whether we have another session or not, or I will be happy to tell you, maybe read this or read that and get...
It's, thank you so much, because I've been following you for over 15 years. I'm an artist, and all of these questions are threads of your writing as an artist, because you're a practicing artist as well as a psychoanalyst. So I will forward them to you and we will go from there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I'd like to just invite everyone to express their gratitude for such a wonderful morning and experience. Once again, thank you, Bracha, for everything.
Thank you, Danielle, for hosting this and initiating this.
Absolutely. Well, we'll be in touch, everyone, and hope you all have a wonderful day. And we'll look for the email on a possible third session, okay? All the best. Bye for now.
Bye.